Well, hello, everyone. My name is Lori Black. I'm the Associate Director of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience here at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. We are very excited to present this series, which is now a whole year old. Began when we first went into this new virtual world, and it's still going strong. So thank you for joining us for the Jewish Music Masterclass. I should say this program is also co-sponsored by our dear friends at Temple Israel of West Bloomfield, Michigan, and we're very glad to have them as partners on many of our programs. So we are thrilled to have you join us for Music and Conversation with tonight's guest, Inna Faliks. To make sure you know about all of our programming related to music of American Jewish Experience, please make sure you're on our event email list. You'll find the link to the mailing list in the chat below, or simply Google UCLA Jewish Music, and you'll find a link to our webpage. It always is the first thing to pop up. We have several exciting upcoming programs, including two on this Sunday, April 25th, at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, you can attend our workshop in Sephardi Mizrahi Piyutim with Galit Dardashti. And at 4 p.m. PST, you can join us for Experiencing Jewish Music in New York, a virtual tour with Tina Fruhauf. May 13th, we will also be presenting a virtual concert and discussion with the ensemble Bent Frequency, presenting a program called Mareot, Mirrors, which is celebrating women in Jewish music. And it is presented by UCLA's own saxophone professor, Jan Baker. Now on to our program. Described as adventurous and passionate by the New Yorker, Ukrainian-born American pianist Inna Faliks has made a name for herself through her commanding performance of standard piano repertoire, as well as genre-bending interdisciplinary projects and inquisitive work with contemporary composers. After her acclaimed teenage debuts at the Gilmore Festival and with Chicago Symphony Orchestra, she has performed on many of the world's great stages with numerous orchestras and solo appearances, and with conductors such as Leonard Slatkin and Keith Lockhart. Faliks is currently professor of piano and head of piano at UCLA. Critics praise her courage to take risks, expressive intensity, and technical perfection, and remarkable insight. Highlights of the recent season include of recent seasons previous to this past year include the Ravinia Festival and the National Gallery in DC, recital tours of China with appearances in all the major halls such as Beijing Center for Performing Arts, Shanghai Oriental Arts Theater, Tianjin Grand Theater, as well as acclaimed performances at the Festival International de Piano in Mexico, in the Fazioli series in Italy, and Israel's Tel Aviv Museum, at Portland's Piano Festival and the Camerata Pacifica, with the modern dance troupe Body Traffic at the Broad Stage in Santa Monica, and Jacaranda series in Los Angeles, where she performed Reshevsky's The People United Will Never Be Defeated. Faliks has been featured on WQXR, WNYC, and many international television broadcasts, and has performed in many venues such as Carnegie Hall, the Met Museum, Moscow's Tchaikovsky Hall. And she collaborates and premieres music by some of today's most important composers, such as Billy Childs, Richard Danielpour, Timo Andres, and Clarice Assad. She is known for her poetry music series, her poetry music series, Music Words, and has collaborated with many important poets. She regularly tours with her monologue series, Polonaise Fantasy, The Story of a Pianist, which tells the story of her immigration to the United States in Odessa. And we will be seeing parts of that today. So it is with great joy and excitement that I introduce my dear colleague, Inna Faliks. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure, Lori. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really very touched.
So tonight we're going to be starting our program by looking at just a little bit of this project that you created, Polonaise Fantasy, which it's not a performance of any one particular work, but really telling a whole story with the work. So we're going to see just a preview segment of it. But can you tell us just a little bit about it before we see it?
Sure. Well, so this is a very, very special thing for me, this performance. It's a show. It's basically a one-woman show, and it tells the story of how I grew up in Odessa. how I became a musician, how my family immigrated to the States, and what it takes to be a concert pianist, how I studied with a wonderful teacher in Chicago, and so it talks a lot about my relationship with my teacher in my teenage years and really how I became who I am. And then the second part of it is sort of the romantic comedy part, which is how I met my husband, or how I re-met my husband, because he's actually my childhood best friend from Odessa, and how we got together. So there's that kind of comic relief in the second half of the show.
All right, well, let's see this preview.
Odessa is torn by the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but in the early 80s it was still ablaze with communist red. Odessa Jews numbered in the hundreds of thousands, the number dwindling down as quickly as it rose in LA, New York, Chicago, to great Soviet relief. Kikes, go home to Israel or any place that will take you, we heard left and right. We eventually helped this Odessa number go down at least by 3. I grew up in an Odessa that no longer exists. I knew I was a musician long before I knew I was Jewish, Ukrainian, or Soviet. The word immigration popped up shortly after a memorable birthday party in 1988. When Aunt Dolly from over there, of course meaning the United States, suddenly appeared in our apartment bringing a huge bag of extravagant gifts like gum and candy. The word was first spoken in our kitchen, and I kept hearing it like an echo, immigration. During tea with my parents, immigration. In my parents' hushed voices at bedtime, immigration. Caught in the chest by my great-grandmother, whispered into the back by neighbors, immigration. We left for Vienna, the first leg of our long journey to the US. The Super Mario video game championship ended as soon as my first piano arrived. The piano was a $200 spinet, bought with a little cash that my parents managed to carry with them throughout the months of immigration. By age 13, I learned Tchaikovsky's First Concerto, Beethoven's sonatas, Chopin and Liszt etudes on it, and it withstood my abuse with great dignity. The great teacher's Emilio del Rosario's reputation of working with children and teenagers, making them into high-level concert pianists from the earliest age, had reached Odessa. The videotape of my piano playing, Leonard and everything, had circled through a few sets of American hands before landing in his. I was invited to the Music Institute of Chicago, where he had taught for many years. The studio door creaked open, and a joyous, rather high, fizzy voice laughed. Ah, here is my next victim. What's up, Inna? I learned that his friends still called him Spielka. My written response to him was, holy shit! We emailed each other nonstop. In one email, he wrote that he hopes I dance the salsa and I should get my salsa shoes ready because he's coming to France. why did you stop writing me? I finally asked this question. His entire being changed from easygoing and fun-loving to fiery and extremely focused. I wanted so much to write to you and to connect with you, to understand you, where you were, what you were doing, what you were learning. But the Inna that I knew, the one with the big bow, didn't exist anymore. There was a young pianist in a very different country and culture from mine. I just felt like I was losing the thread that tied us together. This newly found presence in my life of a person who connected me to the world I came from, a world that didn't exist anymore. I played, then I looked towards a slice of light in the door, and he was standing there, listening.
I just think especially getting to see the whole thing, but even just getting to see that segment, it's just such a wonderful way for everyone to get to know you so quickly. It tells us so much about you. And I was thinking, it's just so, it's very interesting how this is, the medium through which you tell your story. And I was wondering if you could just tell us how you, why you decided to tell your story this way and how you conceived of it, how you constructed it a little bit.
That's a great question, and it's a very Los Angeles story, I think. So this began with me writing a bunch of chapters, which I still hope will turn into a book. And I do write quite a bit. This was before my son was born, so quite a while ago. He's 9 years old now. And I was pregnant with him in my 8th month, I think, and it was a very hot summer in New York. And so I was spending time making these chapters thinking, I really want to use this time and write as much as I can. So then forward a little bit, we moved to LA, and these chapters find their way into the hands of one Cynthia Komsky, who was a television producer and has been hosting series The Belle of Los Angeles. And these are theater series, so they're kind of, people come and read plays. They're just play read-throughs. And she said, Inna, I would like you to do this as a monologue. Do you think you can do that as a recital and turn this into a monologue? And we had this wonderful actress who was me, and her name is Rebecca Mozo. I think she's moved back to New York during the pandemic this year. So her and I did the premiere performance of this together, with me doing the piano pieces, and there's about, I would say 50, a little more minutes of music. And the storytelling was done by her. And we made a CD together of this. It's on the Dallas label, Polonaise Fantasy, The Story of a Pianist. And it's a 2 CD set. But then I found that it's a lot easier to tour with this on my own, because a busy Hollywood actress is kind of difficult, or can be difficult to coordinate with, which is wonderful for her. She was doing a lot of theater work, a lot of shows, and I do hope at some point that we'll collaborate again together. She was really wonderful. But since this is my story, it became really almost, I think, imperative to tell it myself. And so I started doing this show as a one-woman show, and it's been really, really gratifying, just wonderful, fun. And it was, in fact, the last thing I did before the lockdown. It was at a series called Music Worcester up near Boston. So that was on March 11th, 2020, that I did this show.
Wow. It's fantastic. And the musical selections, how did you choose the works? How did you use the works to tell the story?
Well, you mentioned when you read my bio so artfully, and it made me blush, music words. So putting together poetry and music, or words and music, that's something I've been interested in for many, many years. And I've produced, when I lived in New York, I had a concert series called Music Words, where I would invite poets who would read between musical selections, and all kinds of poets from all walks of life, some very famous ones, some very new young ones, and anything in between. And so this was very exciting, and I kept it going for seasons. So when I moved to LA, this was very much in my mind, but I had this new job at UCLA, so I could no longer devote myself so much to music words, even though I still kept it going, and I still do, in my Corona Friday series, which actually, I'll talk about that later maybe, but that's my pandemic series that I've been broadcasting from right here. So I always include poetry in there. And the reason I bring all this up is because I became kind of good at it, I guess, putting together certain words chosen to the music. And I would do it very much intuitively. Of course, there's an intellectual connection as well sometimes, but mostly it's, how does this sound with that? Or how does this feel with that? And does this make an arch? Does it make an emotional arch? Is there a story being told here? So it's all about the story. So it was very natural for me to make this show what it is. And the pieces just kind of put themselves there because, early on it's childhood and it's teenagehood. So some of the pieces there are works that I learned at that time and that are very much part of my repertoire. I included some new music in there that was very important and also autobiographical. And then the second half, for example, the Beethoven bagatelles, which I'll also come back to today. Those pieces are all short, very interesting, contrasting, and quirky, and just they fit with the love story that unfolded in the south of France and had all these whimsical characters, real characters. And so just the music fit with the words kind of naturally. I like to think, I hope so. But the cool thing is that, one can always play around with it and change things up.
Well, speaking of fun and short, quirky works, the next work, George Gershwin's Prelude No. 3 in E-flat minor, a classic American Jewish composer. Why don't we go ahead and listen to it first, just because it is a quick one, then we can talk about it after. I always love hearing those preludes because so much happens in such a short period of time, but it still just takes you on an entire journey. And you tell the story so well.
Thank you. Recorded at UCLA in our beautiful studio.
So one of the things that we find so interesting, and we've gotten to be a part of your programming in some ways, is that you make a real point of programming Jewish composers like Gershwin, just as part of your overall repertoire, as part of your teaching. And I was wondering if you could tell us, where that comes from and how that manifests both in your projects and in your work with students.
A great question, Lori. Again, I can talk forever, so feel free to interrupt. I guess that's part of it. It's just very natural to me. It's my heritage. It's who I am. It's something I didn't know about or realize, as I like to tell people, because, people in the Soviet Union didn't get to be Jewish, really. They only got to be Jewish by feeling how much others disliked them. and how naturally that dislike was woven into the fabric of society, this anti-Semitism, this racism that we lived with. So that's the only way really you knew that you were Jewish, is that there was something off about you, something, not quite right. You had to lie in places to get to places. You had to lie on your passport, like my mother had to do, for example. I think her passport didn't say that she was Jewish. You were supposed to write that you were a Jew on your passport. Anyway, of course, I learned all of this later when I moved to this country. But coming to realize quite gradually who we are and what that means, I just feel like more and more I want to talk about it. And I want it to be part of not just a conversation and a discussion, but of, I don't know, I don't want to say a legacy, but of what I do as a musician, of what I do as a performer, of what I leave behind, and that means recordings, that means commissions, that means my work with students and what I pass on to them. And it's this experience, because, of course, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who's had these experiences, and they're powerful, but I also feel like very many people, many students of mine even might not know about them, as I mentioned in the video so beautifully made by the Milken Center.
And are there any works by Jewish composers right now that you're working on? Any particular projects?
Well, in fact, you might have heard of this. So I won't play the whole thing for you, but so Rhapsody in Blue, obviously, by George Gershwin, happens to just be my next gig, a live one, or partially live, as we, anytime we say live, we don't even know if that actually means live, or does it mean that we're playing live and it's on Zoom, or does it mean that we're recording live and then later it's live on Facebook? It's just very confusing. But this is actually a sort of a live gig, I think, a live performance. And it's with our very own Jens Lindemann, the trumpet player, who actually will be playing he'll be playing that part. So he'll be the clarinet. And we're doing that in Chicago. We're kind of experimenting with making a video recording, which later we will do and perform at UCLA. So it's exciting, and it's coming up in just a few weeks. But that's the next Jewish composer whose music I'm playing. And then after that, I will record Voices by Lova, the piece that was commissioned for me so generously, and which we'll talk about this afternoon, I'm sure.
Well, why don't we, since you queued it up, why don't we go ahead and jump to Leova? Because it certainly falls in the same vein, unless you want to go through the Beethoven first.
Beethoven? Well, you know what, the Beethoven project, that actually the next thing also has a few wonderful Jewish composers from our UCLA community. And this is a project, so let's talk about that first, just because that's coming up as a release on Nirvana Records in June. And this is something I'm really proud of because it's many years in the making. It's 9 world premieres, and it's called Reimagine Beethoven and Ravel. It takes 6 composers from UCLA and then 3 composers from New York and LA, actually, and has them respond to masterpieces by Beethoven and Ravel, and so create completely new works that are inspired by these 2 very different composers. And all of these tell stories that are relevant and diverse and interesting, I hope. And it's a huge project. And the way it came to be during the pandemic is especially cool because, of course, everything was canceled. I ended up recording it into the MIDI of our disc clavier at UCLA. The MIDI was then edited in New York, and then we did this whole big thing on Zoom that took me listening at least 100 times to this and working out every note with the composers, with the engineers, and all long distance. So it turned out to be a pandemic project, and I'm sure everyone's really sick of hearing the word pandemic project. But it didn't set out to be that. It just sort of, became that because that's what we were dealing with. And but finally, it's going to come out. A part of the premiere will happen in the Jacaranda series. That's coming up May 8th. So Jacaranda is a beloved series here in LA that features rare music, new music, and just great music. And so they're going to play Billy Child's and Timo Andres pieces that I recorded for them, as well as Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit. And so that'll be quite special. But then the whole thing will be out in June, and then I'll be touring with this recital program in the coming years. But it's very unique, and it's also kind of hard to explain. So, Lori, I guess we have that video that I think does it better than I do. This recording is important right now because it creates a bridge between now and then, between old and new. In a way, this is the 21st century recital. I decided that Beethoven's birthday being around the corner, it would be wonderful to celebrate him. And I thought this is a perfect way to connect music of the past with music of today. So I asked 6 of my amazing colleagues at UCLA to write bagatelles in response to Beethoven. And I decided to also use Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, a work that I recorded and played a lot. And I turned to 3 incredible composers, Timo Andres, Paolo Prestini, and Billy Childs, and have asked them to compose pieces in response to Undine, Le Juvet, and Scarborough. Now they could do whatever they want with these pieces. They could take them as a starting point and just create something completely new, or they could use a structure. They could be inspired by the key, by the energy of the piece, by its spiritual content, whatever they felt like, which they did so beautifully. And each of these pieces is a profound addition to the piano repertoire.
It was a real challenge, but a real fun challenge that I took on really excitedly because I knew I was writing for the amazing virtuoso Inna Faliks. And it was a really nice feeling to be able to know that I could write anything and she could play it.
It's always exciting to have infrastructure and lines and such a masterpiece to draw upon, but still have the challenge of making it your own. And I can't wait to hear it come to life.
We all know of Beethoven's greatest works, but especially in the shadow of the 250th anniversary of his birth, it's great to be reminded of just how creative and innovative he was, even in his more modest works.
It really felt like we were trading eights, as we like to say in jazz parlance, with Beethoven. And there's nothing more fun for me than a little time travel and trying to tap into the spirit of a great master without too much reverence, with appreciation, but also with a sense of play.
Being able to give our music to someone like yourself is such an immense privilege and an honor. It was a joy to be able to write this bagatelle for you, but it was even more of a joy to hear you play it in the way that you did.
The coolest thing, I think, is that this became a pandemic project. We were going to record the project in March here at UCLA, and this obviously couldn't happen. So I ended up recording the music here into the MIDI files of our beautiful DCFX, the disc clavier. I also recorded this music acoustically. The MIDI files were then transported to New York to Yamaha Artist Services. So this recording is a compilation of MIDI and acoustic work and is really somewhat transformative technologically, I think, because it would not have been possible to do it any other way during this pandemic. So imagine the piano playing this recital by itself, a 75-minute program of Beethoven and 9 amazing composers, and then playing it again and again and again, and me listening to these files, which are actually me playing, and working on them this way, because we can combine the live playing and the playing that's been recorded that can be then played back. And this incredible piano that can do a variety of these amazing things. It can be a great concert instrument, but can also be this technological wonder which allowed for this project, this pandemic project, to happen.
In this case, the artist and the recording producer were about 2,500 miles apart. The technology is amazing, and the ability to do this is amazing. You play in LA, I record in New York, then we send it back to you in LA for listening. It enables things to happen that could not have happened in the past. There's this idea of remote recording. We are currently in a world where remote is the main word defining our lives. And this is just another example of that. And for that reason, it's very valuable.
What an amazing project. There is a question in the chat. It was sent directly to me, but a clarifying item in that video for those who don't work in the recording world. What is a MIDI file? What exactly was being done with your music that way?
Oh gosh, you want to take that one, Lori?
Yeah, sure. Okay, fine. MIDI file is basically
I'll take forever.
Yeah. Simple version, and this is overly simplified. And for those of you that are sound engineers on here, please don't at me. But essentially, a MIDI file is like a digital version of something that's being performed. Often, it is synthesized digitally, is being created by your computer, obviously. But there's a lot of things that you can do with it. You can manipulate it. You can turn it into many things. It's almost like the text of something.
But I should say that the Yamaha disc clavier, basically the information, when you perform on it, what happens in the MIDI file is the exact transcription of what you did. So it's not simplified. It's not like it's basic. Yeah. It's every color, every tiny little pedaling thing that I do would be captured on that. And it's actually enabled long distance teaching, which has been amazing. So for example, this January, I taught students at Seoul University in Korea. And then a professor there taught my students, and then we had a recital. I performed, and then the piano there, the disc clavier there, played back in real time what I was performing, some Beethoven, Liszt, and Ravel. And so it all came up in real time. So that's what this technology is capable of. It's pretty incredible. And we're doing it all the time.
Being able to use a MIDI and manipulate it that way is an incredible thing for us. So as that project illustrated so well, I mean, a big part of what you do is creating new works. You know, finding composers who want to compose for you, putting people in collaboration. This is, you know, a big part of your career. And one of the interesting things that we've gotten to be a part of is it is seeing where this collides with Jewish music. And we're going to listen in a second to a work by your colleague Leova. But I was wondering if we could just start with a question. You know, why is this such an important part of your musical output, the commissioning of composers, and why is it important to do this with Jewish music as well?
Well, yeah, it's another great question, and two-folded answer, of course. So the reason that it's important is because it's fun. No, I mean, I think, there's so many amazing treasures in the canon of piano music, and I will never get tired of playing Beethoven and Schumann and Chopin and Rachmaninoff, et cetera, but I think some of the most amazing things you can do as an artist is work with living composers, because, we can't very well write an email to Beethoven and ask him, how does this really go? But when you're working with a composer, you're intimately involved in the process of creation. And as somebody who used to compose, and I used to compose quite a bit, and then piano sort of took over when I moved to this country, I guess that's my way to continue living vicariously, I suppose. But I just think it's delightful, it's fresh, it's exciting to experiment, to also to give voice to a variety of people, of personalities. And I think it's crucial to create new pedestals. I don't think we need to destroy old ones. I will always say that. I think Beethoven was great. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing his music, but I think instead of destroying old ones, we need to put up new ones in addition. And there's room for everyone. And that's what I keep saying, and I try to teach that to my students. And as far as Jewish composers, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before. It's part of my heritage. It's part of who I am. It's important for me to feel like I'm contributing to a lifeline of Jewish music that continues to grow. And there's just so much out there. There's so much I don't know. There's so much I'd like to learn. And for that, I have people like Lori and Mark Kligman, who's a walking encyclopedia. And who I'm so grateful to have as a resource near me, wonderful colleagues. But just to feel like you're part of that, a part of that oeuvre of music that just keeps growing is just incredibly exciting and inspiring.
Fun was a totally legitimate answer too. Here we go. This is the second movement of Leova's Voices. Um, so that work at first, a shameless celebration, I guess, of just it being only a year after that work was premiered at our very own UCLA American Jewish Music Festival, which you mentioned your last performance. That was the last performance I attended, so it's very bittersweet to watch that video.
And what
But
a day that was! That was
what a
amazing.
day that was. Such an amazing collection of artists that really came together. But the premiere of that work, I mean, really was a centerpiece. I mean, it is one of the great things about a commission, as you know, and a new work, is that it lives beyond that performance. That, you know, hopefully many performers will take it on. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that work came to fruition. I mean, it has a wonderful story, you know, a very wonderful and personal relationship that turned, you know, that brought new works to your repertoire.
Yes. So my friend Lova Gerbin, who lives in New York, and I used to live in New York, and we met. And at some point, I was able to commission a small piece from him called Sirota. And this piece featured the voice of the cantor Gershon Sirota, and it kind of appeared magically in the end of the piece. And so I would be playing the piano, and then suddenly I became like a collaborative pianist to a hidden chorus, and you'd hear his voice. And it was just an amazing way to bring me back to Odessa, because of course he was from Odessa, the great cantor Sirota. So it's a pretty short piece, and I've always wanted to expand it and make it into a suite. And so I had the opportunity to do that with the help of the Milken Center, and with your help, Lori and Mark, and everybody who took part in that project. It was truly amazing to get to ask him to do more. So to write 2 more larger pieces, expand Sirota also, and use 3 different recordings of 3 different types of historical recordings of Jewish music, and together they would create one larger whole. And so what you just heard was Altered Jock, and this was the kind of the more klezmer dance-like part of the suite. And Sirota features a recording from a Rosh Hashanah service, I believe from 1907. And then finally, the last movement of the suite features Friedele Oischer, who was an actress and a cantor from New York. And Lev found this beautiful, very, very moving recording of her singing. So you have these 2 voices, and in the middle you have a work featuring the clarinet, which you just heard. And that's actually a very hard piece, very virtuosic and kind of crazy. And he meant it to be that way. So it's very special. There's really nothing like it, and I'm very proud to get to play it. So I will be recording this hopefully late this summer on a recording called Music Words. So it'll be the centerpiece. And then, of course, it still needs to have a New York premiere and all sorts of other premieres that didn't happen because of the pandemic. So I look forward to that. Wonderful. And I see there's a question here, a very nice, very good question. When you hear another pianist, what are you listening for or feeling? Now, just if do you mean another pianist as in, what do I listen for when I listen to a student, like one of my students, or just in general, a pianist? Well, even if it's just in general, regardless, whether it's my student or if it's a recital that I go to, although I have to admit, I don't go to that many piano recitals. I want to be moved. I want to be touched. And it has to be an authentic voice that comes from the heart. And if I don't have that, I'm just not interested. It could be absolutely perfect. It could be executed amazingly. Everything could be just right. But if it doesn't move me, I don't care. So I think that's something I try to teach to my students, to connect to their own voice while internalizing, of course, the voice of the composer.
Wonderful. Well, we have I mean, I'm a very careful recognizing that we have so many friends on the East Coast watching right now. I think we have time for at least one more work, but first, do we want to go ahead and open it up to Q&A and see if there are any additional questions that you can feel free to put into the chat, or I mean, this is a small enough group that we could feel free to unmute ourselves to ask a question directly. Are there any questions?
Don't be shy, folks. I love answering questions.
What can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of music do you prefer to play when you're alone?
When I'm alone, let's see. Well, when I'm alone, I'm usually practicing. I'm not alone very often. I have 2 small children and a wonderful husband. But when I am alone, I'm practicing whatever I have coming up. And if, let's say, I just feel like just playing, I'll sight read Bach and Schumann to clear my ears. I love to just run through rep that I've recently performed, but really it's a gamut. So it's very hard to answer because I believe that a pianist needs a healthy diet of very, very different repertoire. For example, recently I've been playing a lot of Clara Schumann, who I think, especially this beautiful G minor sonata, which I just recorded, that came out last week. It's called the Schumann Project Volume 1, because it's my intent to record as much of Robert Schumann as possible, paired with Clara Schumann, his wife and the great pianist and a wonderful composer in her own right, whose music has been unjustly forgotten. So I just recorded this Clara Schumann G minor sonata, which is absolutely beautiful, and it's on MSR Classics, you can check it out. But that's a piece I've been turning to a lot just for pleasure and just to play through on a daily basis, even if I don't need to. But that varies. It just depends on what I have coming up and what I'm working on.
I see Ellie's hand.
Yes. Hi, Inna. I'm calling from Michigan. How are you?
Hello.
I was a little late to the call, so I hope you didn't address this with your intro. But growing up with, Judaism in your life, just knowing it was an othered, how do you engage with Judaism now? Is it only through your music, or do you feel like you live, religiously Jewish life now? I'm just curious on the Jewish end of your life after just the experiences you had growing up in the USSR.
I am not living a religiously Jewish life, but I'm living a musically Jewish life. So, I had this, there was one episode in my life when we just moved to Chicago, and there was an option to send me to a Solomon Schechter school. And at first I was really passionate about it. I really, really wanted to do it. And then we came, and then it turned out that I couldn't go home at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon because, I had to practice 5 hours a day or whatever. And I'm just like, what do you mean I can't go home and practice? That's what I do. So that was the choice. It was made, it was just made then. But, my husband, as you saw from that video, Polonaize Fantasy, the story of a pianist, or maybe that wasn't clear, but he's my childhood best friend from Odessa, but his family immigrated to Israel. So he speaks fluent Hebrew, better than Russian at this point, I would say. And he's extremely knowledgeable and very, very much in touch with Judaism, with celebrating the holidays. So he's brought that into my life in a beautiful way, and into my children's life also in a beautiful way. So while we're not, maybe practicing religious Jews, we certainly celebrate the holidays and enjoy them and practice traditions, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So there's a question in the chat from Sherry Richards. Are there other women composers whose work you like to play?
Absolutely. And I'm actually very interested in promoting, I don't want to say promoting, but helping and just giving voice to young women composers. And I've been doing that. So there's a composer whose work I've played and whose concerto I'll be premiering next year, named Clarice Assad, who lives in Chicago, an incredible musician. There's a young composer whose work I'll be premiering in LA next year, Maya Miro Johnson, a big talent, not even 20 years old. Veronica Krausas, who's also Los Angelina, a fantastic composer, from whom I commissioned a suite based on Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, one of my favorite books. So just as an example, on the program with the Hollywood Trio for the Milken Center, which will be out in June, I'll play Julia Adolph's a few short pieces for the piano, and also Fanny Mendelssohn. So I think this is very important. But on the other hand, I really hope that there'll be a time when we don't say women composers, when we just say composers, because that really, it should be that. It shouldn't be a male composer, female composer. It just, at some point, I hope there comes a time when this is so far in the past that it doesn't matter anymore. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. A question here from Mark London. This is a very interesting question. Do world-class pianists, I think he's referring to you, have to take refresher sessions with master teachers? If so, how often? I think people are very, very different. Some people do. I don't, because I think I've had so many amazing teachers and their voices are in my head. So there's something about when you're in a room with a former teacher and you suddenly feel like a student again. And it just kind of, you go back in time to that way that you were when you played for them. And that's not good, because that's kind of going backward. And I believe in going only forward. So I'm really inspired by everything my teachers have taught me, and I listen to their playing and I think about what they've said and I talk to them, or ones that are still around, such as Gilbert Kalish and Boris Petrushansky, whom I adore, and Anne Shine, the great Anne Shine. And my mother, who I think is on this call, who taught me when I was very little. But I don't really, that's just my personal thing. I like playing for friends. I like playing for colleagues. And we have exchanges. We don't teach each other, but we might say, hey, I like what you're doing there, but I would do it differently. So I think that's very, very useful and very important. I even like to play for my own students, because actually I think that's some of the most special times that I can think of when I would play new repertoire. And it feels really raw. You're very vulnerable. I mean, these are your students. You want to give them the absolute best possible. So also, I know sometimes when I'm touring and I'm in an unknown hall, unknown land, I actually picture my students in the hall, because it makes me feel connected and at home. I think over the last year, our students have been one of the things that, as musicians, have kept us the most normal, that is being able to work with our students. Are you? There's a question here from Mickey K. Are you teaching your children to play, and are they talented?
Yes, and well, I'm not teaching them personally. They have their own teachers, a violin teacher and a piano teacher. I wouldn't dare. I think it's a terrible idea. But I do sometimes practice with my daughter, who plays the piano. Her name is Frida. She's 6 years old, and Nathaniel is actually getting quite good at the violin. He studies with Alexander Kalman in Los Angeles, and he's doing quite well. And sometimes I'll give him, comments, but yeah, I don't really. I'm not the kind of mom who will sit there and supervise her practicing for many hours. And my mom was like that. She learned the Barber Sonata with me every note. I was like 13 years old. She sat there and helped me memorize the fugue one note at a time. I will never do that. I just can't do it. I don't know that my daughter will play the Barber Sonata necessarily. But yeah, it's not going to be me who does it.
Well, it looks like that may be all the questions. If there are any other questions, feel free to speak up. If not, we do have one more work. This is, as you described it to me, one of your standard encores. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind, as the encore to this program, if you could just tell us what it is and why this is an important work for you.
Sometimes I make jokes that this is written into my contract. Actually, I think it was a couple times that I have to play it. It's somewhere. But I learned this piece when I was very young. I had bigger hands than many people at a young age here. So I have a far reach. I just realized there's a mirror image, so you can't see it. But La Campanella requires, a big hand so you can play the octaves easily and do the jumps cleanly. So I learned that very, very young. And of course, that was very effective then. Like, wow, how can this kid do it? Of course, now probably you can find kids who are like 5 who can do it. But that's, I don't think that the child prodigy element is the point, but it stayed in my repertoire and I'm very, very comfortable playing it because there were so many pieces that I learned when I was young that, have become staples of my repertoire. So it's just a piece that's brilliant, and that people know me for. And it's La Campanella by Paganini Liszt.
Fantastic.
Paganini Liszt, La Campanella.
So if you wouldn't mind, just sharing what you and I were quickly chatting about.
I'll tell them, sure. I was like, oh no, that's not the campanella I meant, because there's a cleaner one out there, but this one is very special because I was 6 months pregnant, and this was in Italy, and Frida was kicking me really, really hard when I was playing that back at that recital.
That's amazing. I think anyone could say that they would hope that they would play that beautifully while they're 6 months pregnant with a child kicking. So that's amazing. All right.
Thank you.
Well, here, let me go ahead and spotlight here. So I just want to go ahead and take this opportunity to once again, thank you so much for doing this program for us on behalf of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience here at the UCLA Herb Alpert School and our colleagues at Temple Israel of West Bloomfield in Michigan. We are just so glad to have done this program. It was so enlightening and told us so much about you. And I think all of us want to go out and listen to some of your recordings now. So thank you so much for this.
Thanks so much. It really meant a lot to me, Lori. It's always a pleasure, and I can't wait till we get together again in the Faculty Center for one of our famous breakfasts.
I can't wait. I'm from your mouth to God's ears. I can't wait for that. Well, thank you all so much. And thank you all for attending on the East Coast, Midwest, West Coast. Thank you all and have a lovely, lovely evening.